Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to Green Dot Daily, live from the Tommy John studio in New York City. I am your host, Charlie DiSturco. The Carolina Panthers decided it was time to be proactive. They benched Bryce Young for Andy Dalton ahead of Sunday's game against the Chargers. Chad Millman and Simon Hunter hop back on to discuss, well, you guessed it, if the Panthers reeled them back in enough to bet them on Sunday. Plus, the WNBA playoff race is heating up. 3 teams are tied for the 8th and final seed with 2 games left to play. Marino joins me in studio to break it all down. And of course, we'll head to the Diamond with Sean Zerillo as the MLB playoff race heats up. We talk futures, best bets for tonight, and much more. But we start, as we normally do on GDD, over on the gridiron. And let's take a look at some of the storylines ahead of week 3. Perhaps the start that no one saw coming. The New Orleans Saints are 2-0 and have hung 40 burgers on both the Panthers and the Cowboys. We've seen an emphasis on smash mouth football as well, with teams rushing 125 yards per game. That's the highest since 1963. But perhaps no other game better encapsulates that than last night, where the Eagles wasted away over a quarter on the ground late before choking away the game to the Atlanta Falcons. So I have to ask, on this fine Tuesday, is Nick Sirianni on tilt? Loser. And perhaps no better duo to talk this game and all things going on in the NFL than Chad Millman and Simon Hunter. Simon, I'm going to kick it to you first. You're the Eagles guy here. Personally, I've been absolutely disgusted with how the NFL has gone the first couple of weeks, and I hate the amount that teams are running. I understand if they're giving you a couple yards, a handful of yards, take it and keep going, but run. It's not great football, and eventually it ended up biting the Eagles in the butt. How have you seen, the NFL kind of become a little bit more run heavy? Have you felt this same way, and are you a little bit worried about the Eagles?
You Gen Zs and your TikTok. No, I love it. I love this kind of a football. I mean, this is why we love this sport, right? The Saints are 2-0. The Vikings are 2-0. You just talked about it. The Bengals and the Ravens are 0-2. Like, this is what makes this sport so great. And I get your argument, right? That the change in the NFL has been the cover 2, and the teams are just saying to you, please run the ball. We'd rather have you run the ball all game than beat us deep on these quick strike touchdowns. And that's really changed the game, right? Teams have kind of adapted to that. And you said it best, like, it's the old Belichick defense. We'll let you get as many yards as you want, but you're not scoring touchdowns. You're taking threes. And your hate and your anger at Sirianni is well warranted, because he should have probably taken a 3 there in that first quarter early in the game. What happened at the end of the game, right? It turned into be a 1-possession game. They lost that game where it easily should have been a 2-possession game. So Eagles fans' anger towards, or bettors' anger towards Nick Sirianni is warranted here. He definitely blew that game in a couple of tough calls, but at the end of the day, they took a high-risk play with Saquon Barkley. They tried to pass it out of the back, and if he caught that, probably is a walk-in touchdown or at least a first down. He drops it, they lose the game, and that's kind of football, right? It always comes down to 1 or 2 plays at the end of the day. I think Bengals fans can agree, right? They should have won that game. Just 1 or 2 plays, Joe Burrow's fumble, that penalty at the end of the game. That's how you lose these type of games. So early in the season, but I'm with you. Sirianni, he's got to be feeling a little bit of heat only 2 games in.
You're right. Nick Sirianni should be on the hot seat. But listen, I'm sitting there on the couch watching this game. Eyes are rolled to the back of my head as I'm watching Saquon Barkley run. All right, Jalen Hurts sneak. All right, Jalen Hurts push. 40 seconds. I want to see some passes. I want to see some big plays on primetime. Chad, can you be a cynic here with me that you're upset about the NFL because Simon's too, happy-go-lucky even though the Eagles lost last night?
He is awfully sanguine, which is interesting for Simon. I would say the product isn't unwatchable right now because of all the runs. The product isn't unwatchable because of cover 2 and what the defenses are inviting offenses to do. The product is unwatchable because there are flags just about every single play. There have been more than 400 penalties called in the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. That is more than any season dating back 4 years. And here's what's even more frustrating about this. And if you watched the Bears and the Texans on Sunday night, That third quarter took more than an hour. That game didn't end till close to midnight. That's almost 4 hours of going through a game that wasn't high scoring. It's not like they were going back and forth and throwing a lot of passes. It was just so many penalties. And by the way, Charlie, 46% of these penalties are being called right now on offensive linemen. We're talking about false starts. We're talking about holding. We're talking about the new illegal formation where the refs are all over the linemen if their helmet is not lined up with the midline of the center. How is this not something that was just drilled into players in training camp? Every snap, every rep of training camp should have been coaches saying, don't line up too far back. It's not that hard to look to your right or look to your left and see if you are lined up in the appropriate place. It is mind-boggling how many
really
calls
is.
there have been.
It really is. Like every single play, there's a penalty. All the big moments. I mean, the Chiefs-Bengals game decided by that pass interference call, and the amount of holdings that were leading up to that moment as well that put the Chiefs in that territory. It's been disgusting to say the least, and hopefully at least the offensive line illegal formation penalties should be figured out, and maybe it's the early rust and whatnot, but we could put that aside. We could talk a lot about something a little bit more disgusting than all those penalties being called, and that's the Carolina Panthers, guys, because listen, week 1 you went to the well. Week 2 we talked about it. You said you couldn't go back there. Bryce Young, they got blown out by the Chargers. Well, now Bryce Young's out. Andy Dalton is in. The Red Rocket is in. The line has moved. I think it's a problem when the Panthers are +7. They announce a quarterback change to Andy Dalton, and the line moves almost 2 points toward the Carolina Panthers. They're right now around 5.5. I feel like Syl during Sopranos. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me right back in. Simon, can you bet and endorse the Panthers here?
I can't do it, but maybe my partner can do it. But I understand why people want to do it, taking Andy Dalton in this position. But my fear, obviously, is the offense. Me and Chad talked about it last week why I didn't want to give them out again is because I think just as a whole, this whole team is a train wreck disaster, right? They got rid of their best defending players to get draft picks, in which they gave up to go get this Bryce Young guy. And then they lost, arguably their best D tackle in week 1. It's all bad for them. Even if Andy Dalton does come in and give them a little bit of a spark on offense, I don't know if they have anything on defense to get stops in these games. So I'm happy to wait and see. But obviously, there probably is value on this team. They have right now the 5th graded highest offensive line for pass blocking. That's a big deal, right? That means they're not as bad as they should have been with Bryce Young. I think, the coach and the other guys on this team, the analytical side of it, looked at these numbers and are just like, this is the problem. This kid is the main problem for this team. So I can't think of another time in our lifetime we've seen a number 1 pick in his 2nd season being sat 2 weeks into the season. But this is the new NFL, right? Teams are really impatient. They want to win now. So pretty incredible that they're going in week 3 to Andy Dalton.
Yeah, Jamarcus Russell trajectory for Bryce Young. By the way, you mentioned the offensive line. He was pressured on just 4 of 29 dropbacks last week. That's the lowest rate of week 2. Yet they still could not do anything on offense. Chad, does Andy Dalton come in, save the day? Can you bet on Carolina?
I don't know if I can do it publicly, but I can certainly do it in the privacy of my own home on my phone. It's hard to go back to that well. Simon and I will certainly talk about it on the favorites. Who knows? It might end up having to be one of our grossest, most disgusting, most courageous bets. The problem is what Simon said, which is this defense is terrible. They gave up Brian Burns in a trade. Now Derek Brown, who was their only player who can get pressure up the middle at defensive tackle, is out for the season. They are only getting pressure on 8.5% of their defensive plays, defensive passing plays. That is lowest in the NFL. Their defensive secondary is terrible. Their best player, J.C. Horn, is nominally good in certain situations, but isn't really a guy who has the same skills that he used to have. It is a tough spot for this defense. And going against the Raiders, who last week had 5 plays of 20-plus passing yards split between Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers and showed out, coming down from double digits to win a game on the road at Baltimore. they showed something offensively. As much as I want to bet the Panthers, because I do think there is still value here, it's going to be hard. So Simon and I will have to dig deeper on the Favorites podcast.
Yeah, so obviously tune in and see if Chad and Simon can get behind backing the Panthers. It really felt like, at that 7, I tried to rush and get the bet in, but the line already taking off. And then at that point, I was like, nah, I don't really want to bet the Panthers anyway. So okay, I don't have to convince myself to do it. We'll see if Chad and Simon end up making it an exec decision or a big balls bet of the week. But, that's what you tune in to the Favorites podcast and live show for. But guys, I can't let you go without an early lean for week 3. I want to talk about Sunday Night Football. Kansas City Chiefs heading into Atlanta to take on the Falcons. We just talked about the late comebacks, the heroics of Kirk Cousins. It seemed like he kind of had that deep ball going. He wasn't comfortable, but then once he was forced to do it, the Eagles' soft coverage allowed him to move down the field. Right around 3.5-point favorites here. Chad, I'll kick it to you first. What are your early thoughts here?
My early thoughts are I want to wait and see if there's even more sort of momentum and inflation for the Falcons. The line has moved from 4.5 to 3.5. You get into that Patrick Mahomes as a favorite of 3 or less window, and the percentages of his number of covers goes up significantly. So I kind of want to bet the Chiefs here. I do think that from a secondary perspective, from an interior line perspective, the Chiefs can do a lot of the things that the Eagles were doing successfully against the Falcons. And then the Chiefs also have just a much better offense than the Falcons and a much better coaching staff than the Eagles, and a much better coaching staff than the Eagles. So I look at this game and I think, all right, I want to lean Chiefs. I just don't like the number yet.
Right. Simon, no Isaiah Pacheco. Obviously, he is out for this one. And maybe you have to wait, like Chad's saying. Also see if Taylor Swift's going to be in attendance, because we know maybe a few extra calls might go Kansas City's way. But how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, this feels like a pros versus shows. The pros are going to be on this Atlanta team. And you saw that number come down from 4.5 to 3.5, and it's a lot about what the Chiefs aren't doing this year, right? Mahomes does not look good this year, and they have major issues right now at the tackle position. They had to take out their starting left tackle and put in the backup because he couldn't stop getting beat and giving up bad penalties. So it's not all good right now for Kansas City. And you already brought up Isaiah Pacheco, which is a big deal. Like that guy runs so hard. Now they're going to turn to Pirine or this kid Steele, this fullback running back. It's a little scary right now what this Chiefs identity is on offense, because they're a team that I have no worries about them once it gets to November, December. You kind of can get them early in this year, right? I think there are some issues to this team when they're trying to figure out their identity. So not shocking to see that about 90% of the money and 90% of the bets right now are on the Chiefs because it's at 3.5, but this line's still holding. So it just shows you that's professional money right now coming out of Atlanta, keeping this number where it's at. So we saw from Kirk, if you can't get pressure on Kirk and he can just stand there and not have to move, he's not bad. But if you get any sort of pressure, that's when you see him fail. So pretty interesting matchup here between the offensive line of the Kansas City Chiefs and this D line of Atlanta.
Right, so only time will tell on how this line moves. And as a reminder, always check out Chad Millman and Simon Hunter on the favorites, because they will be giving out their favorite bets ahead of week 3. These are just some early leans. But Chad, Simon, I appreciate you guys hopping on, and I'll see you next week for On Tilt Tuesday.
Thank you, buddy.
To celebrate Sean's big weekend and help give everyone a piece of the action, we've got a special offer for new pro subscribers. After Sean's 14-0 Week 2 picks, head over to actionnetwork.com/pro and use the promo code PERFECT for 15% off an annual or monthly subscription. Action Pro subscribers get instant notifications every time Sean makes a bet, and also gets access to all of his player prop projections for every NFL game every single week. Once again, that's 15% off actionnetwork.com/pro with the promo code PERFECT. Over to the hardwood, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, 3 teams are vying for the 8th and final spot in the W with just 2 games left to play. The Washington Mystics sit in that 8th spot thanks to the head-to-head tiebreaker over the Chicago Sky and Atlanta Dream, who play one another tonight. And so that's perfect. We're going to talk about that game in just a second as we welcome in Maria Marino to the Tommy John studio. Hello, Maria. So tonight's slate.
Yes.
And there's obviously 2 games left to play in general. What should we be keeping an eye on just in general as this W season comes to a close?
Well, you mentioned it. The big question mark continues to be who is going to occupy that 8th and final playoff spot. These 3 teams, the Mystics, the Dream, the Sky, they have made it as difficult as humanly possible to prognosticate who is going to get into this final spot. As you saw, the Mystics hold the head-to-head / point differential tiebreaker, but they would need a win over either New York or Indiana, presumably an upset, in their final 2 games to have another win over one of these other 2 teams, the Dream and the Sky. So essentially, whoever wins tonight between the Dream and the Sky is probably going to be your playoff team.
Wow, and that's something interesting, and obviously keep an eye on all 3 teams, 13 and 25. Let's talk about this game tonight, the Dream and the Sky, because you mentioned it. The Sky are out in Atlanta, we saw, and this is like crazy line movement that you don't really see every day. In the Action app on Sunday night, they were 4.5-point favorites, the Dream were. Now, at the time that we're talking, they're up to 9.5 as a favorite. So I have to ask you, is this the time to just buy back based on the market movement?
I don't know how you can't buy back on the Sky here. And I'm warning you, this is the ugliest betting night of the year probably for me. I am holding my nose through this. I was on this show a week ago. I bet the Sky. It absolutely burned me. But I don't see how you can go with the Dream here based on this line movement. I think 4.5, 5.5 points, perfectly reasonable for the Atlanta Dream to win by that. You mentioned these 2 teams have the same overall record. I just think this is too many points for as inconsistent as a team that the Atlanta Dream are. 3 of the last 5 games for Atlanta have also gone to overtime, including their last game. That was a super emotional win. So, maybe the Sky can catch them on like a bit of a letdown spot. Both of these teams are absolutely desperate. Both of them are motivated. Now, Chicago's 2-1 straight up and against the spread in the season series here. Each game was decided by 8 or 9 points. Here's where it gets ugly. Here's where it gets tough. Camila Cardoso for Chicago is a game time decision with a shoulder injury. She only played 9 minutes in the previous game. So I perfectly understand if you want to just see if she's in or out. But again, just this line, there's no other way to go for me. It's going to be ugly. I'm holding my nose, but I don't see any other way.
Listen, I mean, this NFL weekend, we just saw underdogs bar completely come back from large numbers. The Ravens lost to the Raiders. So, could see the same thing here. And then you look at it, you also mentioned Angel Reese out, Camila Cardoso. That probably is leading to this line movement, specifically Cardoso. Right. Maybe she doesn't play, but again, you mentioned it. Seems like a little too much for 2 full possessions to move that line there. But
we shall see. We
shall see. But Maria, you're holding your nose again here, so this is going to get crazy. The other game in the playoff race is the Washington Mystics. They're home 7 o'clock against the best team in the WNBA, the New York Liberty. Can the Mystics hold their own with the number 1 team? You think so?
The dogs are barking again. And I am somebody who believes in the Liberty long term. But again, it just feels like too many points. Okay, so the Mystics are the best team in the W against the spread. 25, 12, and 1 this season. They're 5-1 against the spread in September. All 3 meetings between New York and Washington earlier in the season, the Mystics were able to cover, and they were all double-digit spreads. Double-digit underdogs this season. I was counting on this. I cross-referenced with our Action Network Director of Research, Evan Abrams. They are 38-21, or 64% against the spread this season.
Interesting.
Again, this is where it gets ugly. I'm telling you, it's not going to be pretty. But New York is coming off a loss, so that gives me a little bit of like, oh, they're probably going to really want to bounce back here. And Washington probably is not going to have Aaliyah Edwards. She's doubtful to play. Okay. But this Washington team, it hasn't mattered. They have battled through injuries all year, and hence they've still been able to cover. Now, given all of what I just said, if you're not comfortable betting the Mystics here to cover, totally get it. There is a prop that I do like, so I'll just say I do like Brittany Sykes over 12.5 points. She's just a fighter. She's not going to give up. Talked about this as a desperation spot. I like her quickness, her athleticism against the New York backcourt. And she's also hit this number in 4 of her last 5 games, 6 of her last 10, and in the game she played against New York back in May. So that's an alternative option for you.
I like this look for Brittany Sykes too. And listen, you can always convince me to hop on a Syracuse player prop with Sykes. And if the dogs are barking, hopefully it's not like a Yorkie, it's like a German Shepherd bark, because we need them to keep things close down the stretch here. And listen, it's ugly, but that's when you win. You like to win ugly. You know what I mean, Maria?
Something like that. It's going to be, I'm cringing the whole way, but again, this is where it's going to get ugly, because this is down the stretch of the regular season. You know, the Liberty are pretty secure, most likely are going to be in that top spot. And once again, the Mystics are trying to stay alive, and they're going to fight like hell to do it.
They're going to fight like hell, and they have 3 games, or days that is, left for the WNBA regular season. Maria Marino, best of luck tonight as you go garbage diving. And, you know, I think the dogs are barking.
Okay. Well, let's hope so.
And now over to the Diamond, and let's take a look at how the AL standings shake out with just over 2 weeks left to play. The Tigers and the Mariners are on the outside looking in. Most likely the only team that they could hop is the Minnesota Twins. Right now the Tigers 1.5 games behind. The Mariners are just a half game behind the Detroit Tigers, as you can see right there. The Twins, Tigers, Mariners are the 3 to keep an eye on in the AL. As for the National League race that's heating up, the Arizona Diamondbacks, Mets, and Braves are the 3 teams to keep an eye on here. Most importantly, the New York Mets hold a 1-game lead over the Atlanta Braves, who just split with the LA Dodgers. The Mets have a very tough schedule coming up, but the Braves, 1 game behind the Mets with 12 games left to play. So lock your calendars, because next Tuesday, they meet for a pivotal 3-game series, which probably decides ultimately who will end up in that last wild card spot, as we welcome in Sean Zerillo now to talk MLB playoffs, the outlook there, futures, and more. Sean, we're going to talk, you know, from a future perspective. We're going to draft. We get 2 rounds, a snake draft. You got the first overall pick, which I'm a little bit upset about because you took what I wanted to bet. But tell me where you're headed. We'll talk about Mets and Braves in just a second.
Yeah, taking the San Diego Padres to win the NL pennant at plus 650. This has been the best team in baseball in the second half, 36-16 since the All-Star break, best record in MLB, playing at 112 win full season pace. Now, Fangraphs has the Padres at about 17% to make the World Series, to win the NL pennant. That's roughly plus 488 implied. So there is projected value on them. If you use other projection systems, they have a lower number. But I do agree with that Fangraphs projection. I'm very high on this Padres team. I gave them out at 16-1 to win the pennant, 35-1 to win the World Series right after that trade deadline, saying they had the best bullpen in baseball. And lo and behold, since that point, first in expected FIP, first in strikeout minus walk rate amongst their relievers. But they've also gotten Joe Musgrove, Yu Darvish, and Fernando Tatis Jr. back from the injured list. And I love their lineup for the postseason. Lowest strikeout in baseball at 16%. If you remove Luis Arraez from their lineup, they would still have the lowest strikeout in baseball. So it's a team identity thing. It is not just one guy or a few guys driving that number. Basically, everybody on that roster has a strikeout rate below 20%. They put the ball in play, and that has cured their woes with runners in scoring position from last season. So Padres win the NL at plus 650. I prefer them to the Dodgers and the Phillies. I think they have the most complete team come October.
Yeah, and so obviously I mentioned this was kind of stealing my pick because that's what I wanted to do. So I'm just going to take it a step further, and I'm going to say with my second pick, how about we talk about the World Series for the San Diego Padres? Because I really think this is the most complete team from top to bottom. The offense, you mentioned it. They don't strike out. They're also just a gauntlet of bats. Like, you get through Arraez, you get through, Tatis. Oh, you got Machado. Oh, you have Jackson Merrill, who probably is going to win the Rookie of the Year. And then when it's a close game late, what happens? Tanner Scott, Jason Adam, Jeremiah Estrada, Rob Suarez. They have literally the best 6, 7, 8, 9 guys in baseball. I don't see how, I can see this team obviously losing because baseball is so wild, anything can happen. But when you enter the playoffs and you want from top to bottom the most complete team, from starting pitching, which you mentioned them getting healthy, to the bullpen, they are so dominant, the offense as well. So I bet this team to win the NL. I think around the 16-1, 15-1 number. I still think there's value here to win the World Series at the same price range. Everything I've seen from them the last couple of weeks as they get healthier has made me more confident in the San Diego Padres. And since it's a snake draft, I'm going back to back here. And Listen, Sean, me and you and I are Mets fans, and listen, I hope I'm wrong for this one, but at plus 135, the Mets to miss the playoffs, I think provides some value, and it sucks to say that, but without Francisco Lindor right now, and with his back injury, and he says he might be able to return after this series, but you also don't know how, if he rushes it back, if he'll stay healthy enough. The team's offense in general looks so lost with him not in the lineup. They can barely scrape anything against the Phillies when he went out. Against the Nationals, it took extra innings to really get, that second run across and end up winning. I'm a little concerned with Diaz as well. And then you look at that 3-game series against Atlanta next week. The pitching matchups are lining up to favor Atlanta. You have Schellenbach against Quintana, advantage Atlanta in the pitching department. Chris Sale against Severino, advantage Atlanta. And then Morton, Peterson, kind of a toss-up. Both of them, Morton not great. Peterson a lefty, which the Braves have been able to hit really hard. So I'm kind of worried about the Mets down the stretch here. I just think that, the bullpen's a little shaky. The offense hasn't given me anything to be a believer in. They have one of the hardest schedules remaining because they have 4 against the Phillies, then Atlanta and Milwaukee. The Braves, on the other hand, kind of a cupcake getting there until the Mets. So my second pick at plus 135, I just think the Mets to miss the playoffs. I hope I'm wrong, but that's where I'm headed. What do you think overall on this one? And then you can give out your next bet.
Yeah, the average projection on the Mets to miss right now is about plus 125. So I think getting plus 135 is certainly actionable. I also took, I believe, plus 140 for them to make the playoffs earlier in the season. So you can basically buy out and, our bet line completely, just take the profit, getting the plus money on both sides, or at least buy out of it partially and try to set yourself up to not have a loss. But yeah, that 3-game series in Atlanta next Tuesday to Thursday is likely going to be determinative, and the Mets throwing likely 2 lefties in that series doesn't set up well for them. So we're going to talk about the Braves and their offensive splits in a moment, but they're basically a bottom 10 offense against righties and a top 5 offense against lefties with all the injuries they've had this season. For my second pick, I'm going to go with the Houston Astros to win the American League at plus 400. They've tied for the best record in the American League since the All-Star break. This team has made the LCS for 7 consecutive seasons, so it's difficult to bet against them at least getting to that stage. And that's kind of how I was leaning earlier in the season. Around midseason, it seemed like they had sort of aged out past their window. I still think, though, they have at least 1 year left with this team, and Alex Bregman and Altuve still relatively close to their primes, even though Jordan and Kyle Tucker are kind of their best players. Tucker has come back from the IL recently. This team, like the Padres, also does not strike out. They have the lowest strikeout rate in the American League. And I also project them to have the best bullpen in the American League as well. There is less projected value here, however. Fangraphs only has them about 19% to win the American League. That's roughly plus 426 implied. But I do like this team more than the betting market. I bet them about 10-1 a couple of weeks ago to win the World Series. I put Framber Valdez, Yusei Kikuchi, and Hunter Brown against any top 3 in the American League as well, with Grayson Rodriguez currently being banged up for the Orioles. And I don't really think they need much from Justin Verlander in the postseason either. I really like the innings they've gotten from Spencer Arrighetti. As I said, their bullpen is deep and effective too. So Houston plus 400 to win the American League, and basically every $5 free bet that's hit my accounts in the past couple of weeks since football season started, I've been parlaying the Astros to win the American League and the Padres to win the National League. So come playoff time, that would be positions I'm probably going to take anyway with exacta World Series futures, but I'm sort of doing it manually right now at about 35 to 40 to 1. So if you have a $5 free bet sitting in your account that's going to expire that you don't know what to do with, would take the Astros to win the AL and the Padres to win the AL, stick them together. You got about a 35 to 1 ticket there.
It's really interesting. I remember we talked about them back in May, June, before GDD took that little summer hiatus, and we're like, the sky's kind of falling on the Houston Astros. Yeah. Every single starting pitcher is hurt. They just don't look the same. They were sitting, well below 500. In comes Spencer Arrighetti. In comes Hunter Brown, who, after a very bad start, has been incredible for them down the stretch here. And you're right. It really feels like this team has all the momentum going into the postseason. So definitely like this one here. I couldn't come up with a better AL team to pick in that spot. So there you have it, Sean, going with the Padres and the Astros, and then me taking a step further, the Padres to win the World Series outright. I think that's kind of where we're headed. And then the Mets, hoping I'm wrong, but to miss the playoffs at plus money, I like as well. All right, Sean, before we let you go, we do need a best bet. You kind of hinted at it. The Braves being able to hit left-handed pitching really well. Will they have a lefty against the Cincinnati Reds tonight? And you like them to cruise.
Yeah, I see an advantage for Atlanta everywhere in this matchup. Projected them closer to 60%, so minus 150 would bet their full game money line up to about minus 133. The first 5 up to minus 137. And Brandon Williamson was not supposed to make it to the big leagues last year. He was kind of a surprise promotion at the time in AAA. He had a 4% strikeout minus walk rate, a 6.6 ERA. He did ultimately pitch better than that in the big leagues. But he suffered a shoulder injury this spring, and his velocity is down. His Stuff Plus ratings are down. Velocity down from 93.5 to 92.8. Stuff Plus down from 93 to 68. And the Stuff Plus models, the pitching models, never liked him previously. And he never posted good results in the minors. So he's not a guy who's going to project particularly well. FIP projections out there right now have him between 4.7 and 5.03. Last year, he pitched to a 4.8 expected ERA, a 4.9 body ERA. So he is a replacement level starting pitcher facing an offense that has ranked 5th against left-handed pitching, even with all the injuries they've sustained this year. Atlanta is 21st against right-handed pitching, but they still hit lefties pretty well. Cincinnati is in their better split. They hit righties better than lefties, but they're roughly, 19th to 24th against either handedness of split. Defensively, Cincinnati's been a bottom 5 team for each of the past 4 years. 28th in defensive runs saved, 25th in outs above average this year. The Braves, an above average team per defensive runs saved, 20th per outs above average. So, defensive advantage in there, offensive splits advantage. And then if you want to get to the bullpens, for today's matchup specifically, the Padres have some fatigue that I had to downgrade them for. Today's matchup specifically amongst the 30 teams in play, I have Atlanta with the best bullpen in baseball. I project the Reds closer to 21st, roughly a difference between a 3.3 ERA projection and a 4.1. I have the Padres at about 3.33 and the Phillies at 3.45. So if you want to see the gap between the top bullpens, top 3 bullpens, and where I have a bottom 10 bullpen like the Reds, that is the differential. So just to reiterate, Braves up to about minus 137 for the first 5 innings, minus 133 for the full game. Not rooting for Atlanta in the wild card chase, but going to hope to profit on days where I do see an edge on them. And they were the biggest edge that I found overnight.
Right. I love this spot here for Atlanta. I think it's a great bounce back after the couple of losses against LA. A really good matchup for them against a lefty, as you mentioned. So I tailed you on this one. Just a reminder to follow Sean in the Action app, because a lot of these lines, they move out of range from overnight. Sean obviously sticking with the Atlanta Braves here. That's still in play here. So Sean Zerillo, appreciate you hopping on. Best of luck tonight. And, hopefully I'm wrong about the Mets.
Absolutely, Charlie. Thank you for having me. Let's go Mets.
And just a reminder that any picks we give out here on the show, like the one you just heard from Sean Zerillo on Atlanta, you can easily reference by following us in the Action Network app at the handle @green.daily. We keep track so you don't have to. And that's going to be all on this Tuesday on Green.Daily. Thank you for coming to hang with me. A little bit of football, a little bit of W, a little bit of baseball for you. I'll be back here tomorrow to talk some college football and a lot of other on Green.Daily at 3 p.m. Eastern on the YouTube channel and the Action app. I hope to see you there.